something.
Welcome everyone to the August 25th special meeting of the Vernon Selectboard. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do have a sign-in sheet up there, so can we just make sure that everyone signs in so we have an accurate record of who was here? The first item of the agenda is the fire water tank discussion. This has obviously become quite the topic, and I'd like to keep the discussion as civil as possible. And I'd like to just stick to the facts that we have and all work together to try and come up with a plan or a course of action as to how we can move forward. I think it would be beneficial to possibly start by getting just a brief synopsis of how we got to the point we are today. And I'm not just referring to the last 2 or 3 months. I mean, overall, there was a need for water on this end of town. I recall, at the town meetings, we've put funding into the plan to be able to look into getting a fire pond. Engineering firms have come in and they've been able to find out that for whatever reason a fire pond wasn't feasible. Now we're discussing putting a water tanker in there. If a member of the fire department could just give me a quick 3-4 minute synopsis of that whole scenario so everybody's on that same page, and then we can move the discussion forward from there.
I can give you a 10-minute synopsis of that.
7?
Speak as fast as you want. I'm David Andrews. I joined Vernon Fire Department in November 2007. The water pond project had already been in the works for years at that point. I became the assistant chief in mid-2008. Chief Fox had the water pond project. The short version of the process: to install a tank or a pond, you do the site investigation, stakeholder meetings, engineering reviews, concept design, refinement to the requirements, the bid spec creation, public review, Vernon Selectboard approval, issuance of the bid specs, review of the bids, additional bid rounds based on the results, vendor selection, award, tank order, receipt, installation, first fill and site acceptance, site restoration, and then the pizza party.
No, I mean before that. Okay.
I participated in the Newton Brook Pond walk down in 2009. The engineering issues identified by the professional engineer was that there's essentially no ISO water volume credit. ISO is the rating service that the amount of water that we have in the town that meets ISO requirements is what's used to set insurance rates for homeowners insurance. As an example, a pond that is 3 feet deep offers no ISO rating. The reason is the bottom 2 feet can't be credited because that's the mud layer. When you draft into it, you're sucking up mud. The top 2 feet can't be credited because of variations in water level for the season and because of ice and snow in the wintertime. Everything between that is credible. That's why the pond at George's Mill is a great pond, because it's got a lot of depth. The permits that were required for the Newton Brook Pond was the Army Corps of Engineers, the V-Trans Route 142 access permit, wetlands permits, stormwater discharge permits. We needed a right-of-way legal documents from the landowner. We needed to have an access driveway for the tankers, although there would be no easy turnaround possible. There were line-of-sight issues with the approaches from the southbound 142 traffic. Significant land would need to be flooded to achieve any real water volume, and the seasonal freezing would render it effectively a 0 on the ISO rating for a reliable water supply. Consideration was then given to placing the underground tanks. This is the first time we talked about underground tanks, north of the brook, near the concrete retaining wall of the farm. Issues again identified by the professional engineer. The walls by the farm, the retaining walls there, were in a pre-collapse state. Any construction below the walls could have caused the walls to collapse. The pitch of the topography required the excavation to be quite deep, raising the foundation stability issues for the tanks. And the same permitting right-of-way and access issues will still remain. the letter from April 6th, the highlight to it, this is Stevens and Associates is, when I say the PE, it's the professional engineers. And Stevens and Associates is the group that was used for doing the work before I came on, and that's who we kept. It's April 6th of 2010. Per our meeting on March 29, 2010, Mr. Dunkley and the fire department would like to consider not pursuing the pond or storage tanks at the site, at the farm site, at 4374 Brigman Road. Instead, it was decided to try to locate two 20,000-gallon storage tanks between Newton Brook and 4339 Fort Brigman Road. That's Sam Kendall's house. This would require additional survey work and additional design work for the location. So we then considered moving the location to the tanks first south and then north of the house on 4339 Fort Brigman Road. The professional engineer made a series of visits, and at the request of Chief Fox, prepared a permitting proposal which was sent to both Chief Fox and myself on April 6th of 2010. Similar permitting issues remained. The PE, the professional engineer, sent an email to Chief Fox on December 14 of 2010, resubmitting the proposal and asking for authorization to proceed. Chief Fox forwarded this proposal to my quartermaster on January 4th, 2011, seeking to get the okay to give the professional engineer the okay to continue. On January 10th, the Vernon Selectboard removed Chief Fox as the chief. The authorization for the permitting proposal, as best as I can tell, was never given. Now we're into 2011. During the first week of January 2011, I met with the professional engineer at the Historical Museum site to get his impression of using that site as an alternative to the wetlands area, which was located 8 telephone pole lengths to the south. The following points were identified. There is no wetlands, no guardrails, no culverts, no drainage ditches, and a readily accessible driveway. The visibility to traffic is clear from both the north and the south. With Pond Road intersecting very close to the site, tanker shuttles can be easily accommodated without needing to back up trucks. That's a significant issue, I should point out. Backing up fire trucks is very dangerous. For those who don't know, Jack Horton from Marlboro, Assistant Chief, died. He was run over while backing up a truck at the emergency scene. That happened August of 2009. There's also no right-of-way issues as the town owns the property. That was during the first week of January. I called and requested to meet with the historians at their January meeting. During this meeting, I presented an outline of where we have been, what we are looking at doing, and asked for feedback. Contrary to some reports, I thought the meeting went very well. I was asked and committed myself to keeping the historians updated as details were made available. On January 20th, the professional engineer provided a revised engineering budget for the project. The costs, including unused expenses for the past projects, the engineering costs came to under $2,000. But the total cost, as he initially proposed a project, came to $120,000. It was discussed that there was many variables and we have options to review. The suggested system at that point consisted of two interconnected underground 20,000-gallon tanks. Now you recall this project had been going on for, by some people's accounts, 8 or more years. 2008 town report.
David, sorry, did you say interconnected?
Two separate 20,000-gallon tanks interconnected. That was his initial proposal.
Oh, they are interconnected.
His proposal was 40,000 gallons of capacity consisting of two 20,000-gallon tanks with a pipe connecting the two.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. His total for that came to $120,000. At the last town meeting that this was discussed at, Chief Fox had given a commitment to the town when the funds raised would amount to a little under $90,000, that the project would be able to proceed forward and we weren't asking for more money. So $120,000 didn't cut it. I received an email on February 1st from Carol Hammond. It reads, I had intended to email you sooner about your presentation at the historians meeting. I think many in the group were surprised that anyone would even think to let us know about the possibilities of the storage tanks being sited near the museum, since the property is town-owned, and any objections would be moot. The manner in which you made your presentations was courteous and respectful. February 2011, multiple correspondences, that's the 20 pages I just flipped, multiple correspondences occurred between myself and the professional engineer, including additional site visits and suggestions to reduce the costs. Noteworthy at this time was on February 23rd. During the daytime, we had the 98 Old Farm Road arson fire. 56 responders and 16 apparatus from 10 departments responded. The State Police Arson Squad investigators conducted multiple interviews, state visits, and depositions over the next few weeks. took significant fire department resources but resulted in 2 arrests in April for arson. Also noteworthy in March, Airman First Class Nathan Andrews gets a 48-hour fast deployment notice to Afghanistan. Me and my family traveled to Washington, D.C. to start handling his affairs, clear his apartment, and see him off. I removed myself from Department Affairs for 2 weeks to tend to my immediate family needs. April. During April, the site was walked down with the officers of the Vernon Fire Department as well as with David Walker. Very good site plan input from David, including the placement of the hydrant, where to place it to support the winter plowing to allow winter pumper tender access. April 2011 also saw refinements to the budget, tank option discussions, and site location possibilities. At this time, crude oil was sitting at about $115 a barrel, which was driving up the cost for installing any poly tanks. On April 11, we received an opinion of probable construction costs. 12 cost options were explored, consisting of 2 tank styles, 3 manufacturers, in 4 locations. Jay? The 8.5 by 11 Xerox sheets. We're passing out for everybody so you can see with your own eyes the actual opinion of probable costs. I should note these came out of a Xerox machine at work, which isn't perfect, so if you have some blank pages, there should be the probable costs, which is numbers in the front, and then there should be 4 pages beneath that. So if you have extra pages, got extra pages. As you see on the first page, it shows 3 major categories. The first 2 are for fiberglass tanks. The third is for precast concrete tank. There's only one large-scale precast concrete tank company, that's Mitchie. There's 2 large fiberglass tank companies, that's Containment Solutions and Tanks Direct. You see those as the headings there. Within those, there's the various options. Option 1 is 2 20,000-gallon tanks interconnected for a total capacity of 40,000 gallons. Option 1 alpha, which is also on the first page, is just 1 20,000-gallon tank. Option 2 is a 30,000 and a 10,000-gallon tank. You can see those on the second page. With option 2A, scratching the 10,000-gallon tank and just leaving a 30,000-gallon tank. That's the first 2 categories on the first page. The only difference with those is whether you're buying a tank from vendor A or from vendor B. Option 3 is the concrete tanks. Option 3 and 3A is a 40,000-gallon tank, or 2 20,000-gallon tanks. Option 4 is a 30,000-gallon tank, and you see there's 2 separate locations for it. It would be just 1 tank, whether it's on the north side or south side. With each of those, you can see the costs. These are the good faith, probable construction costs that came from the professional engineer. There's additional correspondences based on some of the concerns with the locations. Noteworthy, March 28th, David, we can make adjustments to the driveway. Looking at the pictures and seeing the roof snow buildup, we were going to recommend a change here too, talking about moving it farther to the north so that we're not in the eating out area where the snow falls. June 1st, my wife, Jeanette Andrews, traveled up to Brattleboro to pick up the plans. I believe those are the plans you have in front of you, Mike, and that Jay has as well. I was currently working night shift. That was June 1st. June 3rd, I set up a meeting with the historians at the Historical Museum for June 5th. June 5th, so 4 days after we picked up the plans, we walked down and made a presentation of the opinions and costs, walked down to the sites, explored the reasons for not wanting to pursue various options, the proposed location, and identified issues. Other than, quote, "we don't want it here," from one man who then left, the conversation, from my recollection, is one of concern for the foundation of the historical building during construction, and the size of the tank and the possibility of damaging the slab, the concrete slab on the annex building, the new building. Dale Gassett provided some excellent feedback for inclusion into the first draft bid spec. We take a look at these 4 pictures here. If you start with option 1, that's the page after the financial pages, you will see that whether you go with 1 or 2 of the 30,000-gallon tanks, you're into that set of trees there. Okay, would it be 1 moment, please? The notes that came in from the historians on January 11 state the feelings represented, this was of the January Historical Society meeting, the feelings presented were that if the town wanted to do it, it was a town property, we had no problem with this plan, if the gardens in the back would not be disturbed. We were assured by David there would not be a problem. The gardens include, if I recall, it's a 5 or 6 inch cherry tree that stands at about 20 inches or 20 feet, and it's got the whole garden around it. It looked from this design here that either of these 2 tank constructions would disturb that entire garden area. In addition to that, with the hydrant where you see it up on the top of the picture, we'd be digging a deep trench pretty close to the northeast corner of the south school. That made this a somewhat undesirable option beyond the cost. Figure 2, again showing a cost reduction using a 30,000 gallon or a 30 and a 10, has the same problem. It's taking out the gardens, and it comes close to the South School Museum. Looking at option 3, the 40,000-gallon precast concrete tank, one of the significant costs here is the length of the underground pipe that runs over to the hydrant, as well as the cost of the tank. Putting 2 20,000s over the other side did reduce the cost, because again, you're not getting close to the foundation, but it's taking up a big chunk of space and it's close to the museum. The 4th option has, it's almost like the 4th option with 2 within it. You've got the 30,000-gallon tank directly over the garden, or a 30,000-gallon tank which is located in the general vicinity of the driveway. June 20th, noteworthy, I resigned as chief of the fire department. June 27th, email from the professional engineer. It's an email from me to Brud. The plans were discussed with the historians and a walk-down was performed. We decided we should go with a smaller tank due to the potential issues with undermining the foundation of the new shed, as well as to proximity to the road and the concern for potentially damaging the Route 142 roadway if we had heavy rain, etc. While I personally don't have a sense of concern for the highway, I do respect the group's concern for the new building. Would you kindly revise the plans to reflect the smaller 20,000-gallon tank? This was to go with a single 20,000-gallon tank located in the vicinity of the driveway. 3 days later, June 30th, from Brud. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you earlier, but would it be possible for you to give me a phone call to discuss the requested changes? At that point, Brud pointed out, and Mr. Ball has the drawings in front of him, there is text that was in the plan drawings that specifies for the 30,000-gallon tank in the vicinity of the driveway to specify in the bid spec option B, which is the 20,000-gallon tank. He had originally done that so as to save us the costs of redoing the design work for the bid spec. And Mike has the drawings after we can take a look at them. July 12. July 12, the Vernon historians had their quarterly meeting. Other business questions are raised about the water storage tanks and the dry hydrant to be located at the museum. Since David Andrews is no longer the fire chief, Andy Gassett will contact acting fire chief Todd Capon regarding the status of the project. Alfred Dunkley expressed concern about the location of the tanks so close to the museum, especially as it is a historical building. Alfred said this project has been going on for years, through the tenure of 5 or 6 fire chiefs. He has offered several different locations, but all were rejected for one reason or another. It would be good to invite Todd to revisit the history of this project. The main concern is the lack of fire protection at the south end of town and the attitude of the state towards allowing dredging of an existing fire pond because of the presence of fish. Walter Zaluzny reiterated his recommendation that the fire department have a tanker which could hold 6,000 to 8,000 gallons of water and be readily available to take to a fire. June 18th.
I thought we were in July.
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. July 18, Todd Capon replied to Dale Gassett's email, providing him with my email address and the chief's phone number for any issues going forward. July 19th, another significant event. We had a structure fire on Central Park Road, 28 responders, 8 apparatus, 7 fire departments. That same day, that evening, I presume, the Vernon Historian Trustees had their meeting. Highlights, there followed lengthy discussions on the matter of the underground water storage tanks and the hydrant that would be installed at the museum. Even though Dave Andrews is no longer chief, he's still in charge of the project. The new chief, Todd Capon, knows very little about it, but will be involved. There was concern on the part of some about the close proximity of the tank to the building, the possible negative effects on the integrity of the building. Questions were raised as to why some of the existing fire ponds were not being maintained. Of special concern is the fire pond south of Walnut Grove, and it was explained that the state had stopped any dredging of the pond because of the existence of fish. The consensus of those present that a meeting should be held with the fire chief, Dave Andrews, someone from the select board, and those of the historians who could attend to see if there is not an alternative to the museum site. It was pointed out that Alfred Dunkley had suggested other sites, but nothing had ever been done about them. Nancy Gassett will contact the select board about someone coming to the meeting, which will be held at 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, July 26th at the town offices. July 21st, another very noteworthy event. Vernon Fire Department members conduct search. They find and they unsuccessfully revive a 2-year-old drowning victim from below the Vernon Dam. Multiple members of the fire department, well over a dozen, by the way, underwent group counseling in the weeks following that call. July 21st, the same day, email received from Dale Gassett reporting the Vernon Selectboard is putting the project on hold to investigate the options other than the museum property. At that point, all work on the museum property by David Andrews was stopped. If I may, one more minute. It is noteworthy to report that in the first 38 weeks of 2011, Vernon Fire Department has responded to 195 calls for assistance. This is a 29% increase over the same period in 2010, and by far the busiest year ever. Vernon Fire has operated on a level-funded budget for 3 years without going over budget, despite the tremendous increase in call volume. Membership remains light, despite pleas for assistance. We're the only department in the area whose members receive no compensation, either in the form of gas cards, per-call stipends, drill pay, etc. Finally, it needs to be stated that there are fire department members in this room, right in front of us, this evening are attending their 4th meeting of this week related to the fire department. They will also be attending all-day EMS training this Saturday. A number of the comments made by certain people in their emails are very hurtful, and these folks do deserve better. I have been proud to be associated with these volunteers. They're almost the only volunteers left in town, and I'm honored to be in their presence. So, thank you for your time.
That gets us to today. So, you explained, I counted 3 meetings with the historians between you or members of the fire department. I didn't catch who attended those, if it was Todd and you, yourself, or Todd. But were there 3?
I first met with the historians at the July meeting, which was the very first people that I met with to discuss the concept for the project.
January meeting.
January meeting.
Was it this group here? Was it different people? Was it?
There was 14 members of the historians. I couldn't give you a...
14 members.
Were you there?
I was there.
I'm going to reference you, Peggy. I'm sorry. I'm going to reference you as the chair of
the meeting that was held with the historians was held before it was really even discussed with the fire department and the fire officers of the select board. It was within a week of having the first initial meeting with the professional engineer to say, is this a viable site?
Okay. Was there any point, and just forgive me here, was there any point where, I guess where I'm going is, at that first meeting, I'm assuming that you met with the historians to just say, this is what we'd like to do.
Precisely.
Do you guys agree with that? When did it reach the point where it went from this is what we'd like to do to this is what we're going to do?
From my recollection, it's never been to this is what we're going to do.
So as at this point...
If I can clarify, because even up to today, it's not determined what we're going to do.
Okay, that was my next question. So at this point, this isn't... this isn't, until we, well, this isn't carved in stone.
It's not even carved in sand.
Okay, okay. Now, I counted that you looked at maybe 2 or 3 additional sites for an underground water storage tank that were deemed unacceptable due to poor visibility or the lack of space for a truck to turn
Prior
around.
to the museum, my involvement, and I can't speak for what I've heard was 8 years. I haven't been in for 8 years. But from the tenure I've been in, the investigations that went on was the sites at the Dunkley Farm.
Okay.
And those sites were a pond, a dammed pond,
A pond, not a tanker.
and tanks
And tanks?
on the west side and then the east side of 142.
Now, you mentioned several times that Mr. Dunkley has offered, or not offered, but suggested alternative sites.
Very much so.
And those sites were looked at by engineers and deemed unacceptable, or can they still be looked at?
The sites that I'm aware of were all walked out with myself, with Tom Fox, with the professional engineer. We've used the same engineer throughout. So everybody knows it's not 3 people, it's 1 individual. And on at least 1 occasion with Skip Donnell, who's the chief of the Northfield Fire Department, who's also interested in this because not only does Vernon not have a good supply on the south side of Vernon, Northfield doesn't have a good supply on the north side of Northfield.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Hammond?
I got involved to get the ball rolling a few years ago. So I was present when we met with the state engineer at the place where they had the place where they would back in and get water. And at that time, the state engineer said he couldn't understand why things hadn't been done because that the state had done an engineering for putting one there.
Where?
Can you tell us what year and what site?
Well, when I did some research, I found out that the pond was supposed to have been put in 1978, and at that time, there was money available to do it, because at that time, it didn't cost like it does today.
But where
The
would
balls
the
got
site
dropped.
be?
Where? The place that we've been talking about, where the firemen used to get their water, and then they're not allowed to put the planks back anymore. That engineer, was a state engineer,
The Walnut Grove?
Yes.
yes,
Okay, so we're all in the
to the
same.
left of the bunker, the silo bunker. He said that there was an engineering done by the state back, I think in the 80s maybe, and efforts were taken to look for that, but we were unable to find it. But my understanding then, even though things had changed, that it was possible to do that, and Mr. Dunkley and I was president at the time, we went back later and dug some pit holes and put some pipes in to measure, to make sure. And the big thing the engineer was concerned about was clay. One of the pits hit water within 3 feet, and there was 4 feet of clay. And the other pit we dug was 3 feet of clay, and we hit the water. And that engineer, which the state engineer, was talking about having some kind of it's out of my league, for the water to come from the brook into this, something to take so the fish couldn't come in, and then it would fill that up and then go back out into the brook. And when I kind of got out of the picture, that was what was going to happen. So I'm a little upset that since '78, the ball's been dropped. You know, I can't point any fingers, I'm not going to point any fingers, but the ball has been dropped and dropped and dropped. And what concerns me now, we're in over $100,000 for something that could have been done, but because the ball kept getting dropped. That's about where I kind of got out of it.
Okay, you have a response to that?
Just some additional input, or response per se. At one point, we were speaking with Brad, the professional engineer, when we were looking at one of the tanks that was north of Sam Kendall's property, 4339. And one of the thoughts for continuous filling was to be able to divert from the stream And our understanding was that would now take state permits, which are a whole different level of complication to put in. I don't know anything about what you're speaking of, but Bill, can you speak for us to fill in a hole here? Before the Dunkley Farm, my understanding was at one point you had offered to put it in your yard. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes.
Okay.
We was approached, I think, 2 days or 3 days before town meeting, if they could put tanks at our place, and at that time, we said, you know, sure.
Do you remember what year we're talking?
Do you remember what year that
It
was?
was when Randy Wheelock was the fire chief.
Right.
So what would that be?
It was in the early
19
2000s,
yeah,
1999,
2000.
2000.
It's about 11 years ago.
And it was at that time that some concerns were brought to me, and that's when I did some research, and I got information that brought it about that they was going to put in a place at the Dunkley Farm, the Walnut Grove Farm, or whatever, and that the state engineers, I don't know when that happened, and so that's when I got involved, and doing some research, found out that the ball had been okayed, and then the ball got dropped, more money got put in, the ball got dropped, and that it was never done. Since 1978 was when the town, at town meeting, voted to put in a fire pond there and had the money to do so. Today, of course, that's been used up in engineering fees. My concern is that we've been doing a lot of paddling around, and we've been, time is gone, and we don't have it done because the ball is getting dropped. And even when after I got involved, then I met with Tom Fox, got him involved, and that's kind of when I got out of it. But when I was there with the state engineer, he said that there'd be no problem, and I'm assuming he's talking about state permits, and he said that there was a design, had already been done for that, and but that was unable to be located, and I never talked to the engineer since then, but to my thinking, when that engineer from the state was there, even without finding the old permit, that the old design, that it was still feasible to do something. The biggest concern was undermining the bunker silo for the corn silos. That was the biggest concern. I thought it was all going to be taken care of, and I kind of dropped out of the picture. It was now in Tom Fox's hands, so I really don't have any information from then on because I kind of got out of it.
Okay. David?
Thank you. So that tells us a couple of noteworthy things, that the 8 years, we're talking at least 11, 12, possibly longer that's been spoken of. I know that my empowerment to work with this started on January 10th, and having been at a number of town meetings and sharing that same frustration of we seem to put money into this fund and nothing ever comes out. It's kind of like a variation of the EMS fund. It goes in, nothing ever comes out. I think we made significant progress in 6 months as opposed to 11 years. To answer the question that people may be asking as far as what is there for money, when I closed out the operating budget for this past fiscal year, the article monies that was left, the fire pond is $88,242.75, which is where I'm deriving the $90,000 figure from. The only evidence that I've seen of engineering costs that have been spent is from my span of knowledge, I have to clarify that, is from going back to 2009, 2010 for the wetland studies and the engineering work that was done at the Dunkley Farm, and those were probably $5,000 to $6,000 total. I don't have an exact figure on it, but I know that the engineering costs were not significant down there because not much progress was made. I also know the engineering costs were going to be very small, and have been very small so far for the museum, because we're not dealing with a lot of the issues that drive up the costs. I know, and I remember speaking with Brud, the professional engineer, that one of the variables here of installing any kind of an underground tank, whether it's a concrete tank or a poly tank, in low-lying water areas, is that you have to have a significant construction cost to get down to the bottom grade where the tank is going to set in, to have a firm foundation in there. And it seems obvious, but I didn't know it until the engineer pointed it out to me. He says, especially with a poly tank, but also with a concrete tank, tank's not always full. You have a fire, we empty the tank, and especially with a poly tank, you finish with it, it's going to bob out because it's below the water grade. So you have to have a strong foundation and bands that actually hold the tank under. And those drive up the costs, and that's one cost that doesn't exist when we move up big poles above the water line.
You mentioned in the statement you made that I believe it was in the week time frame when you took over after Tom. Just prior to that, Tom had sent me a correspondence indicating that he had the means to move forward with this project, presumably a different means than the underground tank. Is that something that could be explored?
Let me expound on that. We have an email from April from Stevens and Associates with the details for the permission to proceed on the studies for the two 20,000-gallon storage tanks between Newton Brook and 4339 Fort Brigman's. Brud resent that December 14 to the chief. It says, attached is a proposal we sent for the fire tank design permitting in April of 2010. As I understand it, this is the area north of the garage and south of the stream crossing 142. Wetlands are critical and time is short. In order for us to design and permit the tanks in this location, we need to have the wetlands done before it snows. Otherwise, we may have to wait until spring. Please let us know if we have authorization to go. He followed up that same day. Ultimately, we will need a signed proposal to get going on the base design phase. An email from Tom Fox, and actually it was addressed to you, Mike, but it was sent to you, to Bobby at Fine Line, and to Mike Ball. Mike C., here's a copy of the proposed contract for the final design for the Newton Brook tanks. I cannot recall if I was given the authorization to sign and fax these back. I thought I was given that authority. As per our conversation, there was at least 4 times this was moved, and we finally have a location nailed down. If this looks okay, or if you'd like to sign off on this, that is fine with me. Then the final design can be completed. The wetlands have been delineated, and the base data, i.e. the topos, have been completed. Once this is signed, then Stevens and Associates can finish the package. Thanks, Tom.
So, that is an alternative to the museum tanks.
It certainly is. Could it be done within the $90,000 figure?
I don't know.
No.
No. How much over would it be?
We would have to have the design work done, but the reason for going up to the upper areas is so we get a sufficient sized tank and not go over. We have not only, there's a number of impediments, all of which have to be overcome in order to get that done. We need to have a Section 404 permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Section 404 Category 2 general permit. I wish I could tell you what it is, but it's a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. Stormwater discharge from the construction site permit from the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources for stormwater discharges. V-Trans permit for the right-of-way for the driveway access. And then you need to come up with all the additional plans. His estimated engineering costs alone were $11,100. That's just for the engineering phase. He provided, at that point, his opinion of probable construction costs, estimated costs, and this estimated cost shows $111,344.
Plus the 11,000, or was that 11,000 included?
Have to look. Hard costs subtotal 96,800 plus contingencies and escalations. It does not say on here anywhere about the engineering costs, so I would have to say it's the 111,000 plus the engineering costs.
Because those figures look comparable to what you have on page 1 of these proposals.
Correct. For going with the large tanks.
Yes, sir.
Did anybody dig any test holes there to see how far down before you hit bedrock by the museum? There's bedrock right above ground just on the other side of the tracks.
There has been no soil disturbed at all at the museum property.
Yeah.
None whatsoever.
And did they rule out the old fire pond on the Newton Brook just below the bunker silo? It was about 20 years ago we dug that out. and for the fire department. And in the process of doing that, they had 2 fire trucks there pumping water all day long to divert the water away from us where we were digging. And those trucks were able to pump all day long while we were there digging out of that brook.
Not to my knowledge.
And the brook, at that time, was a good pond. Planks were in the box culvert that goes under 142, but they've been taken out just somewhere along the line.
I believe, Bill, I believe this is, we're talking about the one on the Grove Pond here. This is the one that the state has got exceptions with the excavating to.
Which never got maintained in 20 years, and it's like anything else, you know, if you don't maintain it and dredge it every so often, it's
You can't dredge.
going to fill in.
State won't allow it.
We've already talked to the state engineers and got a permit to dredge it already.
Great.
Oh, so, wait a second.
We met with Todd Manise 2 weeks ago down there from the state, at where the fire pond was, proposed digging a fire pond for Alfred for his own pond, and didn't seem to be any problem whatsoever to do that. Sent down the permit, we filled it out. He's already given us a verbal okay to do what we need to do.
What would the depth be on that?
Probably somewhere around 6 to 8 feet.
And for how much, is that all of it would be 6 to 8 feet, or just a little bit of it 6 to 8 feet?
Not 100% sure yet.
Okay. Because that's the whole thing about the ISO rating, is that if it only a little bit, then it wouldn't meet the ISO rating, and it wouldn't really do anything for improving the insurance ratings on people's
Right.
homes.
I don't know where they come up with the ISO rating, but as I stated, they're all day long. For at least 10 hours, there were 2 fire trucks pumping nonstop, continuous. They couldn't keep up with it while we were digging.
JJ.
The two things. Walnut Grove one, back when that was dug out 20 years ago, the state at that time had only told us we could do it that one time. And then after that, we couldn't do it. Back at that time, that was the only time we were allowed to do it. And then all the stuff that was taken out, it was actually placed on the bank next to the river. And so when the rains come, it filled it right back in again. We tried going back down there to do stuff with it, just with being filled up. And as far as we knew from the state, we couldn't do anything else to it because of all the fish and everything else. So that's why at that time, that process of dealing with that pond was stopped.
I believe I was treasurer at the time this was all going on, and I may be wrong, but for some reason I seem to remember us going over that, or the select board at the time, not me, and the fire chief. I thought they had plans for, at that same pond that we're all talking about, for a tank of sorts to go either in the water to stop the flow of fish. Do you know what I mean? On each side it would have an income and an outgoing. I don't know whatever happened to them plans, but that's what I remember. I may be wrong. Maybe Lenny remembers. I don't know. Do you remember something like that, Lenny? Yeah, I do. I just can't remember whatever happened to it from that.
It was like a little pre-sediment pond.
Right.
This pond, or further upstream from that.
It
Which is what Todd Manise would like to see now, if we follow through with
A
this.
pre-sedimentation holding tank.
Yeah, yeah.
Bill.
I would just like to reiterate, the state engineer who came down said that it had been okayed, and plans had been drawn by the state years ago on doing a pond there, not a tank. And at that time, Mr. Dunkley had a couple test holes dug, and we put the pipes in. They probably are still there. And we hit water within 2-3 feet, and there was dug down 8 or 9 feet, and there was 4 feet of water in one. It just came like that, and the other one within 3 feet. But what that engineer said, there'd be no problem putting a system there. What needed to be done, because I believe that, I think Fox was there, Mr. Dunkley was there, I was there, and some others, was the design had to be done on letting the water into that pond. No tank was talked about. And then the water going back out so as not to catch the fish, so that it would be sucking up. And then the apparatus or whatever was needed for the fire truck to hook up to and get water. And the only concern that the engineer had was Mr. Dunkley's bunker silo. He said there was plenty of room there for more than enough water, and the water was there. And I don't understand how the ball got dropped at that point and why we went back to tanks.
Now, is this the same spot that you just got the state to say that they would give their blessing
Yeah.
to?
Are you saying Chief Fox was president then?
I think he was.
Yes.
Yes, he
He
was.
was.
Yes, he was.
Because when I started in this whole thing and getting turnover from him, this is complete news to me.
All around Pond Road. He wasn't. Vision Lane's old place. Who's that, Barbara? He's on the fire. See, I joined the club. He's on the fire department.
On Pond Road?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
In Lane's old house?
835 Pond?
No, he's been on it for years.
Frank Johnson?
No.
Less?
Yeah, there was another guy.
You're
that-
talking
Leapfree.
Jim
No,
Leapfree?
Leapfree.
Jim Leapfree?
Yeah. He was there.
Yes, right. He was there.
He was going to get things done.
Cookie?
They were going to get things done.
Oh, yes.
And here we are.
Well, my question is, I agree with Bill that those things need to be looked into. There's no sense in us spending a lot of money putting in tanks in a place that it could have a pond. Pond is nice to look at, and there's ways of sucking up the water without sucking up the fish. Number one, I would like to see that option reviewed more, instead of wasting money on engineering to be putting in tanks, putting in tanks that, I was told that the land north of the museum, if we were to start digging there, it would compromise the museum itself, and it would shift in the soil. So Mr. Tyler is probably right. We need to be looking, if you're going to do something like that eventually, you need to consider looking at the soil behind the museum before you start digging and compromising something. But I would like to see the fire ponds maintained. None of them in this town, as far as I can see, have been maintained. And some of them don't have anything to do with fish, like the pond by my brother's house. There is no fish in there. That is a, what do you call it? It's spring-fed, and there's no way fish can get in there unless somebody goes down and puts them in.
Well, tonight,
So there's no way that fish can get in there.
Tonight I would like to stay concerned with how we're going to move forward with what we're trying to move forward with tonight.
The other comment I want to make is about Skip Donnell. If he's interested in being concerned about water for the town of Northfield, maybe it should be on the West Northfield playground that they put these tanks. That's a place where the kids could run on top of the tanks and not bother anybody. And it's an area that is probably sandy there, and the water could be put there and could be used by both towns. You know, and share the cost.
Thank you for that suggestion. David?
Yeah, I think it's important to make certain that nobody's taking this in an adversarial way when it comes to Skip. He's an excellent resource for us to use. It's also important that I think it's fair to say every mutual aid call that we have, Northfield provides ample quantities of manpower to the town. Vernon's fire department is and has been for years anorexic. I'd like to be able to look everybody in the face and say, we can do everything all the time with all the resources. The reality is there are medical calls in town and people are very ill where there are no medical providers in town to respond. The fire we had at 71 Central Park, the Vernon contingent consisted of 4 people, 3 firefighters and 1 EMS person. That was it. Everybody else in the fire department works outside of town, they're not available. And there, by the grace of God, there was the 3, because one, he was a farmer who just happened to have been close enough to come, and the other was taking a vacation day. It could very easily have been one person in a truck and nobody to run hose. I'd love to be able to maintain all the fire ponds and provide everything else we need, but we simply don't have the resources to do all that.
I have a question before. Is Mr. Dunkley still willing to allow us to move forward with what you just mentioned about the state permitting your land to put a pond there?
You have to talk to Carrie, because I've been, okay, you're asking if I would allow you as the town, right? For permitting. Now, we have a permit.
Yeah, how would the town be involved here?
Well, would you allow us to use
I
and
would allow
develop?
you to use, I'd be glad to. I mean, it's the old story. You build it and maybe they will come. This is the stipulations I would put on it, though. I don't want the firemen playing water tag down there on the property. It's not going to be for recreation and fishing, but I would hope that they would utilize the opportunity to use the water. And Northfield also.
Chief,
And if I can...
I'm sorry.
Say
Yep.
one more thing.
Mhm.
I can say this has been going on since 1978. In 1980, we had a fire that burned our barn, milk and parlor complex and everything. If anybody's ever been through that experience, I wish they didn't. But it's quite an experience to go through, and at that time, the water was one of the big problems why the fire was so slow getting taken care of, not only from the lateness of the town of Northfield got there first, and then Brattleboro got there, and then Vernon came. They were trying to pump water, they pumped mud, and some of the firemen said, well, geez, they could have had that fire out if they'd had the quantity of water that they needed. So anyway, but that's history. Nobody cares about history, I don't think, but
I think the
I've
historians
been on
do.
this.
We're the historians, we care.
Oh, that's right. I'm not.
Enjoy.
And so anyway, that's just a little bit of a story, and this is an issue that I've said many times that I hoped that something would happen while I was still around to see a pond, and so with this thing here, it didn't seem like it was going anywhere, and so I sort of took things in my own hands and started calling around to see what it would take, and Carrie and Lenny here, they've been present, and this is what we've got sort of come up, and so I have no problem, if that's your question. I have no problem. I would hope that the town would take care of it and be glad to make use of it.
let me pose the question to the fire department. Is this feasible? Is this a feasible solution or something to look into as something different than putting it at the museum?
If we can get adequate water supply with a good recovery rate, great. I don't see why it wouldn't be feasible.
Mr. Ball, were your concerns met, or the line of questioning regarding the ISO ratings?
Well, I'd rather speak when we go around. I imagine we're going to go around to talk with the board and query each person, and then I'll speak.
Does anybody have anything further to comment on? Ms. Frost, you had your hand up before. Cookie?
I just wanted to point out that I did send you a timeline document
You
on
did.
Tuesday. I don't know if you got that or not.
I did get it, and I passed
We
it
all got
on
it.
to the board, and I passed it on to the fire
Okay,
department
but
as
that's
well.
the first time we ever heard of this, most of the historians, because most of us haven't been involved in any of this fire tank, fire pond ongoing thing, is January 11th. And then we didn't hear anything more until May 9th. And when David responds to an email from Carol Hammond. And the first time he came to our meeting, it was going to be in the southeast corner of the property. And we were taken aback, and because David just appeared at the meeting and asked to speak to us, we did allow him time to do that. We spent quite a bit of time trying to understand, and he explained what was being proposed, and it was in the southeast corner, and we said, well, if that's what the town wanted to do, it was town property, and if it wasn't going to disturb the garden in the back, which to my recollection, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't going to disturb the gardens, and so we asked to be kept informed. And then the next thing I read is that Dave did go to a select board meeting, apparently a week later, and said that we had overwhelmingly supported this project, which wasn't quite as I remembered it, but anyways. Then at our April historians meeting, we had no new information from David. And apparently there was a lot going on, and I know he was busy, we all are, you know, and I understand that you guys really do a terrific job in this town. You're short-handed, you're, you know, trying to deal with all these issues, and we really appreciate what you guys do for us. We're short-handed ourselves, just like all the volunteer organizations are in town. So I just wanted to make sure that you got that timeline.
We all got the timeline, and we've all been able to review that. And,
Okay.
you know, David has addressed some of the communication issues, and
Yeah,
we're all trying to work together here.
We're all trying to work
And-
together,
And I hope we
exactly.
can find a feasible solution, possibly Mr. Dunkley's solution, cookie.
That's always been.
I agree with Peg, we're all shorthanded, and we all do a lot of stuff that we don't get paid for. And yes, everybody does a wonderful job, those people who are here and doing it. And I worked with Todd my niece, I have to try to remember how to say his name. He was at my place before he went to Alfred's the same day, and we were dealing with the brook as well issues. And he wrote for me a permit that day, signed it, and told me to have it recorded at the town office. So it's not something that is not feasible or not able to be reached. And I think he would work with anybody doing anything with the brook. He's really a great guy. He's got a lot of intelligence. He knows, he can tell you about the brook before you even get there.
For the record, again, could you state his name?
His name is Todd McNeese. My niece.
McNeese?
My niece. I have no idea how to spell it. I just know it sounds like that.
Okay.
I've got his
Well-
name at home and I can get it to you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Carrie, the permit you obtained from the state, is that just for the brook and not the wetlands?
It's right, the brook and right around that box culvert there.
So, nothing to do,
It hasn't been recorded yet, but it's,
but nothing with permitting for wetlands?
we were talking, going back maybe 50, 60 feet from 142. But the other part that I have a question about is this tanks, they're showing 12 feet in the ground, 60 feet long, you know, and as I stated before, bedrock, and be ashamed to go in there and start digging up and around that brick building and get bedrock and then continue to dig and continue to dig and continue to dig until you find a spot where you can actually put a 655-foot long tank 12 feet in the ground. Next thing you know, you've disturbed everything there without some sort of test borings or, you know, 12-foot hole's a pretty good hole in the ground.
Does anybody have anything else to add?
Yeah.
1 second. Mr. Dunkley?
Dave, just for the record, I never got the results of what they found down on the Kendall property after you had them, the engineers down there. What was the, I never saw anything in the results. I guess Crosby, I don't think we ever talked about it. I just assumed it must be, or something that they didn't approve, there's wetlands or
Results in terms of what the cost would be or what the issues would be?
the issues.
The issues were never fully explored because no contract was ever signed for the engineer to continue on with that work.
Okay.
Cassidy has a question.
Mr. Everett?
No, Mr. Cassidy.
Gas it, gas it.
Everett. In the town reports, you know, the monies that are in there allocated refers to it as the Dunkley Fire Pond. I guess my quick question, I know Alfred probably doesn't want to take any money, but if we forced it on them, you know, for this project. But I guess my quick question, being more serious, is the town willing to support part of this project from their funding? Is that part of the consideration for this job?
I mean, I can't speak for the board, but I feel it should be.
I'm sorry?
I can't speak for the entire board, but personally, I feel it should
I'm just
be.
sort of putting it out there as a suggestion, that I think that there are monies available.
I was going to make that suggestion myself. If Mr. Dunkley's willing to have the town be able to use the fire pond, then the town has a responsibility, and there also, I feel, so.
I think, though, too, is that it needs to meet the ISO rating. There's no reason why the town should spend the money, town money, unless it is going to improve the ISO rating for the insurance purposes. So if they come back and say, as this is the design, but it doesn't meet any of the ISO requirements, then the answer should be no.
I disagree.
Well, that's my
I
personal
think that's a
opinion.
conversation we can have, but I think the number one important thing is we protect the houses down at that end of the town, so that if there is a fire down there again, God forbid, we have the
Yes.
resources we need to put the fire out.
Your-
That's number one.
Your argument is moot, since that the whole goal of this meeting is to do that. So all we're talking about is the different methods in order to do that. And one of the things that I believe that it has to do is satisfy the ISO rating and provide the water for protection. The ISO rating is all about establishing a good water source, and there are the characteristics of a good water source in the ISO rating, and any pond that goes in there needs to satisfy those criteria.
How, Mr. Carey, I think you're going to answer my question.
I just wonder about the feasibility. I mean, the tank's a good idea and all, but if the tank were closer to the brook on the south side of where the pond used to be, but not buried only partly in the ground and then filled over to road level or road height, so there wasn't a float issue with an empty tank, but you were still next to the brook where you could put water into it. It's still back off the road on the south side and the east side.
Has to be 4 foot at the minimum.
Deep.
Yeah, they have to frost, you know, the whole frost issue comes in as, the reason that tanks are so great is, number one is, the fill and suction piping are put in at slope, so that any water that's left in the pipe will drain back, and there is no water left in the pipes within the 4 foot recommended frost zone in the state of, you know, for our area. The tanks are then set below, and so you don't have an issue with freezing. So, you know, we can't put the tanks at ground level. We have to basically have them 4 foot down for insulation purposes.
We put one in at the Vernon Green for their potable water 20-something years ago. It's 4 feet above ground, insulated. It's a 5,000-gallon tank. They've never had a frost issue with it. It's all insulated. It's right in front of the Vernon Hall.
If we think we can insulate it, but at the same time, depending on how cold it is and the water usage, if you're flowing and moving water from that tank, it's also different than a stagnant fire pond that may not be used for some time.
You had your hand up.
Yeah, I've heard this a couple of times, Peggy, that the first that the historians heard about this was January 2011.
As a group.
Yes.
Individuals may have had some background, but as a group, that's...
I want to make sure it's understood by everybody that there was no delay in communicating to the historians. This concept didn't start until after Christmas of 2010. We're talking less than 2 weeks before the fire department membership, before the select board had even had a discussion on it. The very first people who had the discussion that we had with was to historians. I don't know how I could have communicated any earlier to the historians.
No, I wasn't saying you should have. I don't believe we
Okay.
felt any way that you should have come to us earlier. It was the time frame from when you came in January,
Okay.
and this is my personal feeling.
In January-
When you came in January, and then when you sent the email to Carol on May 9th, design being finalized at this time, tank placement is to be north side of the school in the vicinity of the driveway. You didn't come to us in between and say anything about the location change.
Between January and May, what was being worked on was to have something to bring forward. If you look at the handout that was presented, you would see these are the options that came to us in April from the engineer, and it's quite easy, based on the feedback from the historians, to rule out most of the options so that we weren't disturbing the area that you mentioned in January you didn't want to have disturbed.
But you didn't come and ask us.
But let's,
You guys told
It
us.
doesn't matter, I'm not going to argue.
yeah,
but
let's
you're
try
not
to
understanding
move
what I'm
forward with a
saying. I don't-
solution.
The point I'm making is the effort I took all along was with the effort of trying to satisfy the concerns that were presented to me at the January historians meeting.
Okay.
I guess that's the problem with emails. Maybe a phone call would have been.
Well, we'll work on communications in the future, but tonight, let's just try to get to the bottom. I have two people ahead of you, and then I'd like to close up the discussion after that. Mr. Gassett.
Mike, Paul, why is the ISO rating so important, if the town is going to support, this thing in a financial way? I'm not sure. Can you give some clarity to, what I'm hearing you say is that you're not in favor of the town contributing any money to this fire pond if it doesn't meet some ISO rating?
No, the guidelines for designing a fire pond that is satisfied with the ISO rating, when you start to take a look at, you build a fire pond, and a fire pond typically is going to be serviced by some source of water that can have sediment. So in that, there is a sediment buildup layer on the bottom, so you have to take that amount of volume goes away. Then you have to turn around and take the amount of ice that builds up. How much ice builds up around here in the wintertime, on a cold winter? That amount of water goes away. You don't have that. So what ends up happening is there's a form of a band in the middle of usable volume that you can use. So and that's what we're talking about here is in the criteria for design. If you don't have a criteria for design, how do you assure yourself that you're going to have a source of water that's going to provide enough water to be able to fight a fire, especially if it's Vernon Manor?
I understand everything you said.
Okay.
But how does that apply to an ISO rating?
The ISO has a design criteria for rating a fire pond, and that criteria is what I would like to have applied. And the fact is that you have a certain amount of sediment barrier. You have to take away a certain amount for volume. You've got a certain usable volume in the middle of the pond. And then as far as the size of the suction, the ability to bring in the truck and have a truck there to be able to take a suction on it.
Can I take a stab
All
at
it
that?
is, huh?
Can I take a stab at this?
Sure.
Try a different tact here. ISO is a rating organization that insurance companies use to rate risk. Most, if not, well, I can't say all, most of the fire departments in Vermont are ISO rated 9. If you don't have a fire department, you're a 10. The next one up is a 9. If you have a reliable municipal water supply providing hydrants like Brattleboro, you can get below an 8. The best that Vernon could do is an 8. Within 8, there's 2 categories, an 8 alpha and an 8 bravo. To increase your ISO rating, there's a number of categories that you have to qualify for. And I'm not speaking gospel, because it's been a while, but it includes the maximum gallonage that your fixed pumps on your apparatus can pump, the amount of large diameter hose you have, the specific ratings within the automatic 911 system and their record, their, if you will, on-time delivery average from picking up the phone, calling 911 to the time they dispatch us out, and water supply in town. And the water supply is rated on how many gallons are available on a truck or in a reliable supply in town that can be accessed for a fire. That gallonage depends on the square miles of the town and the population of the town. The benefit of achieving all those, and we have everything pretty much in place, we just have to document it except for the water supply. The advantage of that is when you're at that point, you then call an ISO and you give a challenge. Prove us. You get rated down, and then everyone's homeowner's insurance in the town, they see a reduction. The ISO people report to us, and a number of towns have actually got water supplies and have gone to ISO 3s and ISO 2s, have a sufficient decrease in the homeowner's insurance rates that the total outlay that a homeowner puts out between the taxes that they pay for these upgrades and the insurance that they pay is lower. There's a net benefit, there's a dividend that's paid by investing to get the ISO rating down. That's been one of the goals of the fire department, is to get ISO 8 Bravo, if not 8 Alpha, so we lower everybody's homeowners insurance costs, and the total cost of living in town goes down. ISO, the organization, has a textbook criteria that says this is what we accept for water supply. Obviously, the best supply is what's on your truck. Beyond that, it's what's in tanks that, by their criteria, are accessible 24/7, 365.
Do any of the Vernon ponds now have an ISO rating?
Nothing in Vernon yet has an ISO rating. If I could rephrase the question, if you're asking, are there any ponds in town that are eligible for ISO rating, the George's Mill Pond most definitely qualifies.
So at this point in time, we're not getting any benefit vis-à-vis the insurance from an ISO rating anywhere in this town?
Correct. The only way in which we will get any ISO benefit is first for us to assure ourselves that we meet these criteria, and then asking ISO to come in and test us. Once they test us, they certify us, and then the insurance carriers respond.
Have you done that?
The fire department from getting an ISO rating at the Mill Pond?
The Mill Pond does not provide the adequate water supply that we need ISO for the town. It's the total aggregate for the town.
Okay.
Okay.
I just have one other quick question.
Does that make sense?
If Alfred decides on his own to do this pond, and it doesn't meet an ISO rating, does that mean the town of Vernon will avail themselves of using it?
Oh, absolutely. It could very likely meet an ISO rating. The question is, how many gallons does it meet, and how does it add into the aggregate? And it goes to what Cookie was saying. It's not the tanks on the trucks themselves, and it's not the tanks on the truck and what Alfred puts in. It's all the fire ponds. What can we have? What can we actually get in dredge and get additional gallonage to come up to that limit, that minimum that we need to make that ISO rating?
I think this is going to turn out to be an important issue, so I'd like to ask a question on that.
Chris
So
is
then-
ahead of you.
Oh,
No, go ahead, while you got it on your side, I wrote mine down.
she knows I forget. So you're saying then, is it possible with the ponds we have in town now, that we could get an ISO, a higher ISO rating without even putting in a pond at
I have
Dunkley's?
absolutely no idea.
So whether we put a pond in at Dunkley's, and help, Mr. Dunkley puts a pond in and we help him pay for it, that might not change anything anyway at all. I mean, we could put it in, and it could be what we need for all the ISO rating, but that's only one pond, with the other ponds not being deep enough and all of that other stuff that Mike was talking about. That might be enough that we wouldn't get a higher ISO rating anyway, so just one pond may not do it.
That's absolutely possible. The key is, when we were looking at the discussion of putting in a pond versus putting in a tank, and we looked at the issues that the state had with the permitting and how much actual reliable water supply, and that's really what ISO comes down to, is reliable year-round water supply, was it made sense to go towards a tank.
Chris,
Um,
I see.
You were talking about it had to be at least 3 feet deep for it to, and to be able to replenish itself for an ISO rating, correct?
No. My understanding of the ISO for natural ponds is you cannot take credit for the top 2 feet of the surface, and you cannot take credit for the bottom 2 feet. So if you think of it as the clogging of your artery, that mud zone you can't take. The gallonage that is resultant from that is added to the aggregate to achieve your ISO rating.
Because wouldn't that
It's 4
pond,
feet.
because it's in a brook, it continuously replenishes itself.
There's-
So if they dug it down and big enough, it would be,
I cannot speak to how ISO calculates in a tank that has a replenishment in it. My understanding is they're looking at a static supply.
Yes, and then we have 2 questions left.
I'm going to explain this really easy so that everybody can understand it. When you're drafting 1,000 gallons a minute out of a pond, the strainer has to be 2 feet below the water, and it's got to be at least 2 feet above the mud. Otherwise, you can forget it.
You'll suck mud or you'll
It
suck
will
air.
not work.
Or some air, we'll suck mud or air. Or you'll create a,
Okay.
So the ideal pond would be 6 or 8 feet deep.
Is George's pond that deep?
Mr. Hammond?
It is up toward the middle.
My last button in is, this has been going on since '78. I would hate to see this get tied up. Nothing against Mr. Ball, but even if Dunkley's
The
Pond.
other thing about balls, dropping the ball. For me, it's like, come on.
I just don't want
Lighten
to.
up.
Make a statement I don't want you to take offense on. I just don't want to see this get so tied up, because, let's say Mr. Dunkley's Pond will be like Ted George's Pond, would be applicable, but we still would not meet ISO because we have nothing north of town. So I'm understanding correctly that
That's no
it has to
reason
be
to
the
not do
whole
it.
town.
There's no reason not to do it.
Right, that's what I'm saying. There's no reason not to do it.
You are right.
Just because you can't get the ISO reading. Now, my main beef is I've seen some stupid engineers, this is what I don't want Mr. Ball to take offense against.
Oh, my goodness.
In construction, in jobs that I've been on, some engineers have blinders on, or they got a cloud in front of them. And our elderly housing, the engineer firm that did that, they got the tray, the counter for the elderly people to reach up. When old people get old, they shrink. So now, here's a place for them to serve, and the people on the other side are going to put the food here, and then these little ladies are going to come up and grab hot foods in their face. Poor engineering. They ought to take those same engineers they used in Brattleboro and padlock them to a plow truck in the wintertime with all those stupid curtains. That same engineer firm has wasted and wasted money because of the glassed-in area out there. Any competent contractor knows the codes and the zoning to spend tens of thousands of dollars or whatever to lay out a plan. When it's there, cut in stone, they're limited to what can be done. So what I'm saying is, let's find an engineer that doesn't have blinders on.
Mr. Peduzzi?
Let's not waste that time. Waiting for
I'm wondering if anyone could tell us what ISO requirements are for this, like for the Dunkley Pond. Because we're going to build it, and we might as well build it as close as we can to, if it's not, unless it's extreme.
I guess we'd have to find one of those engineers that's not tied to a plow.
We got a name of one right here.
ISO has specifications that you can.
There are.
McNeese. Todd
I can't
McNeese,
speak to
right?
those levels of detail.
Feet deep.
My
Dave,
niece.
do you know
My niece.
Todd Deere?
Knees.
Does that ring a
My
bell?
knees.
He's a state engineer who helps build fire ponds. I've talked to him 2 or 3 times. And he was on the phone, I think he talked to Gary, right?
Briefly,
Yeah.
Alfred, is he the one that does the,
See the hydrant guy?
the grant, the fire pond grants?
Dry hydrant.
Dry hydrants?
Dry hydrant grants, yeah.
He's,
Right.
he's called me a couple times, left a message, and he wants to get involved.
Oh, good.
Whether he does or not, or whether we feel that's...
What was that guy's name?
Dear. But before I forget, because I am, well, I guess I shouldn't say, I'm getting senile to the historians, but there's also grants for dry hydrants.
Yeah.
State grants that we could
Yeah,
try
I
to
think-
tap
I think he
into.
deals with that.
Exactly.
What
he
was the
does.
man's name again?
Todd Deere?
Todd Deere, like, I spell it, D-E-E-R.
Carrie, did you just say
Yeah.
he was willing to come down September 8th?
D-E-E-R-E.
Oh, yeah.
Carrie just made the comment that, go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah,
go.
he told me he'd meet with us September 8th about the dry hydrant at the Dunkley Pond.
All right.
I got it.
Is the fire department interested in pursuing this?
He was going
Other
to
avenue.
contact the fire chief, he said. That was a conversation I had with him 2 days ago. Whether he's had a chance to get a hold of you yet.
I don't think so.
Yeah, he may not have got you yet.
I don't see why they couldn't be.
Are you interested in pursuing this other avenue?
If we can get a nice, deep, big pond, I don't see a problem.
Do any members of the board want to make a statement or have any concerns?
No?
I'd like to just state that, Stevens and Associates are probably one of the most adept and knowledgeable professional engineering firms in the area. And I've used them in the past personally, and I know that as far as the work that they've done for Brattleboro, I'm against changing professional engineers in midstream. I think that we only have so much money. I think we have a success path where we are. People should not have concerns as far as where the tank is going to be sited, specifically because a professional engineer who basically has a lot more knowledge than most people as far as involved in this, and that there's no concerns as far as for the foundations. There's no concern, should be no concern for the work. We have the ability. We are very close to moving forward with the tanks. I think it would be a mistake to go backwards. I personally, this thing has gone on long enough that we are in striking distance. If this hadn't have happened, as far as the delay right now, we could have been siting the tanks and putting the tanks in before snow flies. Now it's not going to occur, period. This will not occur before spring. And so I'm disappointed in the fact is that the tanks aren't sited and that we don't have the protection. And that with the work that has been done to date, we have the ability to do this underneath the existing financing. So personally, my vote would be is to stay the course and put it in and cite this as it's indicated now on drawings Charlie 1.
I say that Mr. Dunkley's willing, it's probably be a less money to help him get it in. I think we should go with that, and without the tanks. But
Vermont, all over the state of Vermont, is loaded with ponds with dry hydrants. I mean, I learned about dry hydrants and appropriations when we were putting money in the budgets. It's how Vermonters have been putting fires out for 100 years, and I'm not saying a tank system is maybe not I don't know if it's a better system. But the point is Mr. Dunkley already is in the process of permitting, which is further than the process of the tanks. The permitting is already just about done. He should have his permit very soon. I'm not as concerned about everybody's insurance rates coming down as I am protection for people who live in that area of the town. And if a fire pond can be put in there, I think that the town should jump on board. Thank Mr. Douglas profusely for taking the steps, and certainly the money should be spent in helping Mr. Dunkley put that pond in.
How long, maybe you can answer this because you've been involved in these things, if we were to go the route of a pond as opposed to a tank, how far back would that put the project?
How far back would that, which project?
How far back would it be before we could get water protection on that end of town?
I have nowhere near enough data points to speak to that.
Ask Carrie Tyler.
I don't know. I assume Alfred's going to want to dig a pond as soon as we can.
My main concern right now, if you went down there and wanted 10 gallons of water, you probably wouldn't get it out of the brook because it's filled in, nobody's maintained it. Kerry, I had him work 2 or 3 hours one day cutting the brush so we could find the pond. The sign that says fire pond.
Didn't even know it was there.
We didn't even know it was there. And so my main concern right now, tomorrow or next week, is that Kerry gets down there and he does something as soon as we can get a go-ahead. And that's why I pressed the people to get the permit. And I mean, we need some fire
within a week
protection
or two?
there. So at least, if we can dig it out so we can get some water.
So we could do this as quickly as we could put tanks in.
But, I mean, if you're going to get involved and require, put it out for bids and so forth and so on, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, doing it myself, I may not be able to pay my taxes for a couple of years.
It's no different than the government.
I always has, so I hope that my credit's good.
It is.
Do you think this is going to happen in tanks or not anyways at this point?
This is an apples and orange discussion. This is not an either or. I would just like to point out that every year there's an appropriation for fire pond maintenance, and there's fresh money in there, and that fire pond maintenance can be used to maintain this fire pond. It has no impact on these funds. This isn't A or B. This is the validity of A and the validity of B.
As I stated in my emails to, I think, the majority of the people in this room tonight, I want all three sides to come together and come up with the best solution for what will help Vernon as a whole. Is it this, or is it a pond?
I think you've got the pond.
You've got
And the
2
fire
feet
chief
of ice on the
said
pond in
that
the winter.
he would go with the
You're
pond as
quite a
long as it
long
was
time
maintained
getting
and
Right, but
deep
I
enough.
believe that when it gets designed and engineered, it's going to have the correct 2 feet, 2 feet.
Basically, act on Cookie's comment about not being maintained. I have at least, 3 of my firefighters that are going to be taking on all the pond maintenance.
Oh, wow.
They're going to be going through. One of them just got back from vacation, so I'm going to catch up with him. We're going to take and figure out like a spreadsheet, what needs to be done, and stuff like that. So that will be taken care of probably Saturday afternoon to get that in the works. We can start going through them.
Okay, so again,
He's
we're
okay
well
with the
behind
pond.
my time frame here. Are you okay with looking into this alternative option?
With leaving this storage tank as a backup option?
As a backup, if this fails or falls through, then there is a backup. But if we can make this our primary movement forward, is the fire department okay with that?
Well, like
He
I
said it was
If it meets the
like I
standards,
said,
yes.
If it meets, if we can get it 10 feet deep, that'd be better. But if we can't get it but 4 feet deep, then we're going to have to go.
Well, he said 6 to 8.
I understand that. I'm just saying, we can't,
Right, I understand it now.
And Mr. Dunkley, you are willing to allow the use of the town under the conditions that we don't have any water play down there?
Right.
No jet skis, I'm had it now.
And the historians, are you okay with still allowing this as a backup in the event the second plan falls through?
I'd like to see it drops completely. Waste of time and money. I told you.
Well,
weeks ago.
we may not need it.
No, I told you.
Speak to Alfred.
I can't speak for the historians as a group.
But right now, the course of action is to pursue Mr. Dunkley's solution.
And I agree with that.
Okay.
And I also want to personally, and for the historians and the Atherton historians, thank you personally for getting this meeting together tonight. I know it took many weeks of emails and so on and so forth to get this meeting to happen, and I thank you very much.
All of us in this room are just trying to do what's right for
yeah.
Vernon. And that's,
Yeah.
I'm glad we can come together.
I'd like it noted that through half of the days that we were throwing emails back and forth, Mike was on vacation. And he was responding from vacation, which I don't think anybody should have to do. Everyone should be able to go on vacation. So I think you should be applauded for what you've done, Mike. Thank you.
Ms. Allen.
I just want to say, and I'm one of the trustees for the historians, that when it gets to the point where if for some unknown reason the fire ponds don't answer the question, I would hope that somebody would come to us and work with us on the second half or the next solution or whatever you feel is the backup.
Of course.
That we are kept in mind and you work with us, not, kind of throw us out information as you pass by.
My concern, the only concern I have at this point, if Alfred Pond goes forward, does the town give him any kind of insurance indemnity or anything of that sort, because it's going to be on private land? I don't know what kind of contractual, if there needs to be one, or if it's just a handshake, but the problem is this litigant-driven world that we're in, I'm just wondering if there should be some sort of gentleman's agreement or something written up, for for liability issues that should they occur.
I'm sure the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns has already a pre-engineered release of liability form that would be then looked at by the town attorney and then signed by both parties.
Yeah, I had assumed that probably I'd have to have my lawyer draw up something. I think I have some such thing already. I'm not sure whether it's on record here. It's been there so many years.
I think there's
I
state
bet it is.
statutes that protect the landowner when they allow.
Yes,
Yeah.
there should be.
There are.
Yeah.
But the landowner has to have insurance on. Alfred rents from me, and I have to have a special policy for his men in case one of his men were to get hurt on my property. So I
That's a
have to
little
have
different though,
special-
because he's renting from you, you're actually a landlord.
Okay.
This is a citizen volunteering their area for a fire pond. I think, we certainly would have to go to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns and check the statute, make sure the statute is written the way we need it to be written, but I'm pretty sure that the statute would protect him anyway. Otherwise, no one in Vermont would ever allow their little ponds to be used as fire ponds.
No.
Okay, can we move forward? Thank you, everyone.
This overturns a previous formal motion.
My thing,
This needs a formal motion.
my thing, my thing.
Well, Mike is indicating that this needs a formal motion because it's overturning a previous motion that was made.
I don't remember
I don't
voting on
know,
anything like
You
that.
don't remember when David came in and we said to sub?
Yeah, I remember that, but it was on the vote, that sounds good.
So you're not happy.
I don't know. I know that I've forgotten more about ponds and water.
I'm going to tell you, there was a motion years ago that was a fire pond down there. That's why they found the fire pond.
All right, I want to, in the interest of getting us out of here,
It doesn't matter in regards to this that you're talking about.
in the interest of getting us out of here, Section 2 is regarding personnel evaluations. I wanted to make sure that everybody was still on track with having the evaluations done. It was brought up to me that Katrina is done with her probationary period, and she's going to need a personnel evaluation as well. So I would appreciate it if each of you could email me what you would like me to put in that evaluation, and I will write it up and then get it to you guys to approve before I give it to her, and that will be my evaluation. Is that okay? Finally, there is one tiny bit of new business. I received a call from the Elderly Assistance Board.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but he was rolling up his paper and everything, and I didn't understand what you were saying. You want us to
I want you to
kind of critique?
No, I want you to participate in giving me stuff to put into Katrina's evaluation.
Okay.
Send me your comments, send me your feelings, and
Okay.
I'll compile it and make an evaluation for her.
All right.
And then send it all back to you for your approval.
That sounds good, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I was approached by the Elderly Assistance Board regarding, they received a request from a lifelong resident who would like to have their house painted. Basically, some of their guidelines say that the work that they give money for has to be not cosmetic work. It needs to be, the building is not able to be lived in for some sort of reason. This is cosmetic work. So she is questioning whether or not we could use the Alice Brooks Fund in order to accomplish this. This specific person has no family to help them. They are completely willing to pay for part of the process, but they don't have money to pay for the
Young
entire
people or
process.
old people?
They are elderly, but it doesn't fall under the elderly assistance guidelines because it's cosmetic work. And
Is it is it important that this gets done? I mean, is it, necessary?
it's
Because
cosmetic work. It's
Then
paint.
if it's cosmetic work, it does not fall under Alice J. Brooks either. It's poor people, the elderly or poor children. And it has to be something need.
Do you want to expound on?
I'm sorry, who's asking, so I didn't hear it.
Chris and Patty both indicate that cosmetic work wouldn't fall under Alice Brooks as well.
Okay.
Mike is getting the book to verify that.
I think it has to be a specific need.
I mean, I know we paid for kids to go to camp and so forth, but they were very low.
But they're,
income
yeah, that's right,
It was
that's kids.
Never paid for anybody's house to be painted.
Well, you're right, and he's asking to pay the person, not for the,
Just the labor.
just the labor.
Is for the relief of poor children and aged persons in the town of Vernon.
Yeah, that's no
Relief of.
stipulations. So,
In other words, if they were hungry,
Okay.
or,
Or they needed a new roof, or
Yep.
They became handicapped and needed a
Yep.
a ramp.
A ramp.
I wait for my roof to crap out when I'm another 10 years older, I can get
You can apply for it.
assistance.
You're almost there.
All right.
You're almost there. Maybe another 4 years.
so the board is saying no. Is that correct?
I would say no. I don't know, Mike.
Okay. Is there any further business?
I move that we adjourn.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I take away my motion.
what about the email today about what Chris said about the
Warrants.
warrants?
Oh, can we just get 3 people to go in there this week and sign those off, and that would give her a majority
I
to...
think we need a motion for her to pay them, and then we'll just, or she can bring them and we can sign them at the next
I
meeting.
thought
We did that.
We did have
We
a,
did
we
that.
had a motion
Because we
before
knew there
that
was going to be a
stated
couple
that,
weeks.
that in times when we didn't do that, 3 people would go in, and then we basically...
Oh, so it was
would do
carte
the
blanche.
Official, yeah.
Okay.
We made a motion at the last meeting because we were postponing our September 5th to September
Right.
12th. We made
Yeah,
a
we
motion
did.
to allow
Yes, you're right,
Sally
we did.
to pay the warrants as needed while we weren't.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So
Yep, we
already
did.
made the motion.
But I thought in the
I'll go in
past,
on
that
Monday
we
and
also said
sign
that
my
if we
I'll-
had
I'll
to,
go in and sign.
that
I'll
3
go sign.
people would go in and
Right,
sign it.
right.
So all we're doing, that's
Yeah.
the second time now.
So if we
Yeah.
can just, when you cruise by,
Stop in.
yeah.
Got it. I hope you guys will all.
Motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Did you already make that?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Was there any discussion?
Are you all set on September 11th?